Most people don't struggle to build muscle because they're doing things wrong. They struggle because they think muscle is something you unlock. Like there's a moment where everything clicks together, the right program, the right diet, the right supplement stack, and suddenly progress becomes easy and permanent. So they keep searching. They change their training every few weeks. They bounce between splits, they tweak rep ranges, they add rules, they remove rules. And every time progress slows down, they assume the answer is something new. That constant searching is what makes building muscle feel complicated. Because muscle isn't unlocked, it's accumulated. When I first started training, I genuinely believed everyone else knew something I didn't. I assumed the people who were bigger, stronger, or more muscular must be following a smarter routine or eating in a more disciplined way, or using something I haven't discovered yet. Steroids. I thought there was a level of knowledge I hadn't reached, so I copied what they were doing, then I copied someone else, then I changed things the moment results slowed or motivation dipped. At the time it felt productive. It felt like I was dialing things in. I was busy, I was researching, I was experimenting. But what I didn't realise back then was that muscle doesn't reward searching, it rewards staying. Staying with movements long enough for your body to adapt, staying consistent when things feel repetitive, staying patient when progress doesn't announce itself immediately. Looking back, most of my early mistakes weren't about effort or discipline, they were about impatience disguised as optimization. Here's the simplest way I can explain muscle building after years of training. Your body only cares about one question. Is this worth adapting to? Not, is this optimal? Is this impressive? Is this what everyone else is doing? Just, is this stimulus repeated often enough with enough support to justify change? Once I understood that, everything slowed down in the best possible way. Training stopped feeling frantic. Food stopped feeling stressful. Progress stopped feeling fragile. I stopped treating muscle like something I had to chase and started treating it like something that builds quietly in the background when the conditions are right. And that shift alone probably did more for my progress than any program ever did. Let's talk about training. Most people think progress comes from constantly upgrading their workouts. They look for smarter splits, more advanced exercises, more variation, more intensity techniques. But muscle doesn't respond to novelty, it responds to demand. If your training creates enough demand, meaning the muscle is challenged hard enough to require adaptation, and that demand is repeated consistently, growth will follow. And that's it. The workouts that built most of my muscle weren't exciting, they weren't complicated, they weren't constantly changing. They were the same movements, done well, over long periods of time. The same presses, the same rows, the same squats. Week after week, month after month. That's why simple exercises, repeated for months and years, outperform complex routines that change every few weeks. Muscle adapts to what it recognises, and it can't recognise something you never repeat. People also massively overestimate how much training they actually need. There's a belief that more work automatically equals more growth, more sets, more exercises, more days in the gym. But there's a point where extra work stops being productive and starts becoming noise. Most muscle is built by doing enough, not everything. Enough intensity to create a stimulus, enough effort to challenge the muscle, enough consistency to let adaptation happen. Not endless volume that you struggle to recover from. I made better progress once I stopped asking, what else can I add? And started asking, what can I repeat well for a long time? That question alone filters out a lot of the nonsense. There's also this idea that every workout needs to feel extreme, that if you're not exhausted, drenched, or barely walking out of the gym, it didn't count. But muscle doesn't need to be annihilated. What it does need is a clear signal. And that signal comes from taking your working sets to failure, or very close to it, not from piling on endless volume or trying to destroy yourself in every session. You don't need to turn every workout into a war. You just need to make sure the sets that matter are done with real intent. When those working sets are pushed hard and you repeat that process consistently over time, the signal adds up. That's where growth actually comes from, not from how broken you feel when you leave the gym. Food works in exactly the same way. Nutrition is often talked about like it's a puzzle to solve. Macros to dial in, timing to be perfect, foods to eliminate, rules to follow. But in reality, food is simpler than that. Muscle won't grow without fuel. You can train as hard as you like, but if you're not eating enough and not consistently hitting your protein target, your body has no reason to build new tissue. It doesn't need precision, it needs adequacy. Enough calories to recover from training, enough protein every day to support muscle growth, enough consistency for weeks and months at a time. For a long time, I trained hard while trying to stay as lean as possible. I hovered around maintenance, missed my protein more often than I realised, and wondered why progress felt slow. Once I committed to actually hitting my protein target and supporting my training with enough food, progress became far more predictable. Not dramatic overnight, just steady, repeatable, and sustainable. This doesn't mean you need to overeat. It means you need to stop underfueling while expecting your body to change. Muscle is expensive tissue. Your body won't build it unless it feels confident that the resources are there. If food feels inconsistent, growth feels optional, and your body will always choose survival over aesthetics. This is where a lot of people end up burning out. They expect progress to respond instantly, so when it doesn't, they start forcing it. They train harder when their body is already carrying fatigue. They tighten up food when performance actually needs support. They add intensity and complexity when what's missing is simple consistency. It becomes a cycle of pushing without letting anything build. The problem is, muscle doesn't work like a switch you flip. It's cautious. It only changes when it recognizes a pattern, the same demands repeated over time with enough support behind them. And that kind of change doesn't happen quickly, it happens gradually. And this brings us to the part most people don't want to hear. Time isn't just a factor in muscle building, time is the process. Muscle grows quietly while you're repeating the same behaviors again and again. That's why it often feels like nothing is happening. You train, you eat, you sleep, you repeat. Day to day, it feels uneventful. Sometimes it even feels pointless. But zoom out far enough and the change becomes obvious. People quit because they expect progress to feel dramatic. Real progress feels boring. It feels repetitive, it feels slow, it feels unremarkable. And that's exactly why it works. This is where a lot of muscle building advice goes wrong. It focuses on urgency instead of patience, control instead of consistency, rules instead of repetition. But muscle doesn't respond to urgency, it responds to trust. Trust that if you keep showing up, your body will adapt. Trust that the process works even when it doesn't feel exciting. Trust that you don't need to reinvent everything every few weeks. The people who build impressive physiques aren't the ones constantly changing direction. They're the ones who stay on the same road longer than most. So if you're training regularly, eating enough to support that training, sleeping reasonably well, and repeating that process without constantly changing it, you're not missing anything. You're already doing the hard part. You don't need to rush it, you don't need to optimize it to death, and you don't need to compare your timeline to anyone else's. Building muscle really is this simple. It's just slower than people want it to be. And if you can accept that, you're already ahead of most people. If this way of thinking about muscle makes sense to you, then you're probably already on the right track. I'm not interested in shortcuts, extremes, or selling the idea that there's one perfect way to train. I'm far more interested in what actually holds up when you zoom out, when training becomes part of your life for years, not just a phase you dip in and out of. This mindset is what stopped muscle building from feeling confused or fragile for me. It's what allowed progress to happen quietly in the background, without constantly second-guessing every decision or feeling like I was falling behind. And if I'd understood this earlier, I would have spent far less time searching for answers that weren't really missing in the first place.